The 1970s were supposed to be the era of women's liberation. The sexual revolution was in full swing, and for the first time in history, women were demanding total control over their own bodies, their careers, and their reproductive choices. Advertisers saw this cultural shift, and they didn't see a human rights movement. They saw a gold mine. To cash in on the liberated woman, a pharmaceutical corporation rushed a revolutionary new birth control device to market. They called it the Dalkon Shield. They promised it was safer than the pill, completely maintenance-free, and the ultimate key to sexual freedom. Millions of women trusted them. They had this tiny plastic device implanted. But the corporation was hiding a fatal design flaw, a flaw they were explicitly warned about by their own quality control team before it ever went to market. They ignored the warnings to beat competitors to the shelf. Welcome back to Let's Make It Interesting. Today we are uncovering the horrific story of the Dalkon Shield, how a massive corporation hijacked the language of feminism to sell a defective medical device, resulting in hundreds of thousands of injuries, forced hysterectomies, and a cover-up that blamed women for their own suffering. By 1970, the original birth control pill was facing a massive PR crisis. Women were experiencing severe, sometimes fatal, side effects from the incredibly high doses of hormones. They wanted an alternative. They wanted something safe, hormone-free, and highly effective. Enter the A.H. Robbins Company. They were a mid-sized pharmaceutical company famous for making chapstick and Robitussin. They had zero experience in gynecology or birth control, but they saw an open market. They bought the rights to a newly invented intrauterine device, or IUD, called the Dalkon Shield. It looked like a little plastic crab with 5 fins on each side, designed to grip the uterine wall so it wouldn't fall out. The marketing campaign was completely ruthless and brilliant. A.H. Robbins deployed an army of salesmen to doctors' offices across the country. They provided glossy brochures aimed directly at the modern woman. They told doctors this was the premier device for young, unmarried women who hadn't had children yet, a demographic previously told not to use IUDs. They promised a pregnancy rate of just 1.1%. They promised it was the safest thing on the market. Within months, the Dalkon Shield was the most popular IUD in America. Over 2.5 million women had them inserted, but there was a catastrophic flaw, and it wasn't the plastic crab shape, it was the string. Every IUD has a string attached to it so a doctor can eventually pull it out. Normally, these strings are made of a single, solid filament of plastic, like a piece of fishing line. Bacteria cannot travel up a solid piece of plastic. But the inventors of the Dalkon Shield didn't use a single filament. They used a multi-filament string. It was made of hundreds of tiny nylon fibers encased in a thin plastic sheath. Why is that a problem? Because the human body is warm and moist, and if the sheath broke down even slightly, that multi-filament string acted exactly like a candle wick. It wicked deadly foreign bacteria from the vagina straight up through the protective barrier of the cervix and dumped it directly into the sterile environment of the uterus. And here is the most enraging part. A.H. Robbins knew. A quality control supervisor at the company named Wayne Crowder tested the string before the national rollout. He realized it wicked water immediately. He went to his bosses and told them the string was a bacterial highway. He begged them to change it. His bosses told him to ignore it. A few months later, they fired him. They cared more about rushing the product to market than protecting the women who would be wearing it. The results of this corporate greed were apocalyptic. Because the string was actively pulling bacteria into the uterus, women began developing severe pelvic inflammatory disease, or PID. Had been brainwashed by the A.H. Robbins marketing materials guaranteeing the device's safety. They didn't know what they were looking at. Many sent the women home with aspirin. By the time the infections were caught, the damage was irreversible. The bacteria literally destroyed women's reproductive organs. Hundreds of thousands of women were left permanently sterile. thousands of women in their 20s had to undergo emergency, life-saving hysterectomies. And for the women who did get pregnant with the shield in place, because that 1.1% failure rate was also a complete lie, the consequences were horrific. The device caused septic, fatal miscarriages. At least 18 women died directly from Dalkon Shield-induced infections. When the lawsuits finally started rolling in, A.H. Robbins didn't issue a recall. They didn't apologize. Instead, they launched one of the most disgusting legal defense strategies in corporate history. To avoid paying damages, the corporation's lawyers blamed the women. In court, they aggressively cross-examined the victims about their sexual histories. They argued that the women didn't get pelvic inflammatory disease from the defective wick string. They argued the women got infected because the 1970s sexual revolution made them promiscuous. They tried to shame the victims into dropping their lawsuits by humiliating them on the public record. They weaponized the very sexual liberation they had used to market the device in the first place. It took years of relentless pressure from whistleblowers, feminist health advocates, and devastating lawsuits before the FDA finally stepped in. A.H. Robbins eventually filed for bankruptcy to shield themselves from the financial ruin of over 300,000 lawsuits. A $2.4 billion trust fund was established for the victims, but no amount of money could replace the health, the fertility, and the lives that were stolen. The Dalkon Shield is a grim reminder that when a corporation adopts the language of empowerment, they are usually just looking for a new demographic to exploit. They sold feminism in a box, and women paid for it with their lives. We have to know our history so we stop falling for the marketing. If you found this story as enraging and important as I did, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next one.